All right, we are live. Good morning, everybody. Chuck Holton here, coming to you from Panama. And it's about 11 a.m. here in Panama. That means it's noon on the East Coast of America. Hope you had a great weekend. And that's Shula back there, by the way, our black lab. She likes to come lay in here because this is the only room in the house that gets air conditioned, not because we need the air conditioning, but because we need the dehumidifier. Quite a bit going on over the weekend. A whole bunch of targeted active violence attacks. And we're going to talk about some of that. We're also going to talk about Trump's move. He's ordered Oregon National Guard troops into federal service to counter what he calls domestic terrorists in Portland. Roughly 200 soldiers so far are involved under the Title X federal authority. Of course, he's getting a lot of backlash on that, without a doubt. Oregon's governor and the mayor of Portland, Keith Wilson, fired lawsuits off, claiming that this was a perfect example of federal overreach, while social media is all ablaze with accusations of fascism and authoritarianism and all the other isms. But we're going to talk about the history of National Guard deployments in the United States, and we're going to see whether or not it's actually fascism or authoritarianism to do that. Now, the bigger context, this follows Trump's executive order that labeled Antifa a domestic terror organization from September 22nd. Legal scholars say there's no statutory mechanism for designating domestic terror groups like that, and so he's sort of making it up, but it's definitely politically explosive and, I would argue, highly necessary. So today we're going to dig into what's happening in Portland. We're going to talk about the legalities of doing so, sending federal agents and troops up there. We're going to talk about the history of using National Guard troops in the United States to quell violence. And we're going to talk about the left's absolutely unhinged online pushback, the selective application of justice by the Biden administration. And it's strange how these people who are losing their minds right now over this didn't have much of a problem with it when it was the Biden administration cracking down on the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers. And so we're going to talk about that. And then the spike of mass violence that's happening all across America. So it's going to be coming up in this hour. Now, first, I want to talk about flu season, because it's flu season again. Pharmacies are already foaming at the mouth, trying to jab you with something that they call moderately effective, which is about like wearing flip-flops in a snowstorm. Moderately effective, according to the CDC. Hey, at least you get a sticker out of it. But there is a better option. It's from the wellness company. It's called the Contagion Emergency Kit. As a matter of fact, I got a picture of it right about here. The Contagion Emergency Kit, think of it as an urgent care in a box. It doesn't have any fluorescent lighting or a 3-hour wait or a guy coughing directly into your face. But you get doctor-prescribed tools like ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, generic Tamiflu, and a nebulizer, a Z-Pack, and more. It's basically everything you'd want on hand if you'd rather treat symptoms like a grown adult instead of going to beg your insurance company for mercy. I got one, and I brought it down here to Panama because the idea of sitting in a germ-filled waiting room flipping through a decade-old People magazine really doesn't scream healthy to me. Now, I crack open the kit if I need it. I follow the doctor-written guide on the inside and then get back to my life. Thousands, actually, I think over 1 million other people have already done so, gotten one of these kits. Judging by the reviews, they're not exactly wishing they spent more time at Walgreens. So go to twc.health/hotzone and use code HOTZONE to save $32 and get it before cold and flu season goes full blast. That's twc.health/hotzone, code HOTZONE for $32 off at the wellness company. Okay, so thank you very much to our sponsors today. Now, Oh, by the way, that's U.S. residents only. I know we got a lot of people from around the world, and unfortunately, Sanity doesn't ship internationally. So if you are watching from overseas, especially, but even if you're watching from the United States, do me a favor and post where you're watching from in the chat on here on YouTube. I like to see where everybody's checking us out from. It's always amazing to me how many different places around the world I go and run into hot zonians that have been watching the show. And it does help the algorithm as well. You guys did a great job on last week's Friday episode. We've had out of that video, we've had over 600,000 views already. And that says something. You guys are doing a great job on getting the word out, sharing the podcast on your social media, and chatting in the chat box, and all that stuff helps a lot. So thank you very much for doing that. We got people from all over the place here: Arizona, Montana, Brisbane, Norway, California. We're going to be talking about California a little bit today. Fayetteville, Georgia, Armenia. Hello, Rubina, my sweet daughter-in-law. Thank you very much for watching. Now that you've posted where you're watching from, if you're on your phone, just close the chat real quick and hit the like button, because it's covered up by the chat. You have to close the chat to hit the like button. Don't forget to do that, though. That also tells the algorithm more people need to be watching this content. So without further ado, let's move on. Let's talk about what's happening in Portland right now. The Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, approved Trump's order to federalize 200 Oregon National Guard troops. Now, they're already officially tasked with securing federal buildings, particularly the ICE facility in Portland. Now, before the ink was dry on that order, there were lawsuits lining up that argued that President Trump violated the Constitution and also federal statutes by federalizing the Guard without meeting the Insurrection Act conditions. Here's the thing, though. So far, the Supreme Court has upheld that the president gets to define whether or not something meets the Insurrection Act. And so you have, let's look at the Trump tweet here. At the request of Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem, I'm directing Secretary of War Pete Hegseth to provide all necessary troops, capital T, to protect war, capital W, ravaged Portland and any of our ICE facilities under capital facilities under siege from attack by Antifa and other domestic terrorists. I'm also authorizing full force, capitalized, if necessary. Thank you for your attention to this matter. I don't know why President Trump feels the need to capitalize every other word in his sentences. It seems like somebody with as much money as President Trump and as much power and time on his hands could dictate what he wanted to put on his social media and have somebody spell check it first. But that's just a pet peeve on my part, because I'm an editor as well as a writer. And so we won't hold that against him. I do want to say kudos to President Trump for taking these steps. And there's been a lot of people on social media who are setting their hair on fire and getting their undies in a wad over the president's use of the term full force. And they're saying, what do you mean? Do you mean lethal force? Do you mean killing people? Well, whatever is necessary to get the job done. I don't think President Trump is necessarily calling for lethal force, like, that sending in the army to kill people. That would pretty much go against the Posse Comitatus Act and that sort of thing. So now, again, we're going to talk a little later about the history of using the National Guard to quell riots around the United States. It's actually got a very long and storied history, so it's been done since the beginning of our country. But so far, the lawsuits that are being brought against President Trump, they're going to engage in lawfare. You can expect that to happen. But the lawsuits say that this threat is just being manufactured for political theater. Well, let's take a look at this threat for a minute and see just how manufactured it is. This was, I think, last night in Portland. We'll go through a couple of these, and I'll probably have to turn the audio down just so that we don't get in too much trouble. As a matter of fact, before I show this to you, I'm going to take a step here that would, I think, help keep from getting the video demonetized. I'm going to put my picture up in the top corner of that. Whoops. I put it in the wrong place. Hang on just a second. We'll copy that and we'll go down here. And there we go. Okay. So take a look. Pause it right there. That explosion was a very large firework called a mortar that was thrown by the protesters at the federal agents. Those things have the functional equivalent of at least a quarter of a stick of dynamite in them. If you were to stick one in a tree trunk, it would blow that tree trunk to kingdom come. If you put it in a hollow tree trunk. How do I know? Because I used to do that when I was younger, a younger man, younger and maybe not quite as smarter. So these things are dangerous. They are potentially lethal. If they go off in somebody's face, they could blind them. They have injured many police officers because this is a common tactic used by Antifa. And that's one of the reasons why these policemen have to be dressed up in full battle rattle, with helmets and masks and goggles and everything else. But I also want you to take a look at how many of the protesters here, let's see if we can get this one going. Turn this down a little bit. Here's a woman getting arrested. These guys are not playing around, at least in terms of arresting the people that they can. Now, he's got pepper spray in his hand. That cop right there is spraying people, but you see that some of the protesters on the left are wearing masks that would make them impervious to the pepper spray. So this is from freedomnews.tv. So I don't know. You make up your own mind. Does this look like it necessitates some sort of federal response? Does this look like that, National Guard troops might be necessary to augment the police to keep this ICE facility from being overrun? Obviously, there's a lot more protesters than there are police. The police are actually retreating there, backing up. And then as the protesters encroach on the entrance to the ICE facility, the police will come back out and push them back again. But you see these protesters, they're wearing, oh, wait, stop. You see that guy right there in the pink mask? Wait, go back. See that guy right there in the pink mask on the left? I almost guarantee you that is that I've run into that protester before. I showed you, I don't know, it was a couple weeks ago on a live video that I shot in Portland of a street preacher being accosted and threatened by Antifa. And one of the guys was wearing a mask just like this. And he had he was screaming in the guy's face and everything like that. And this guy looks very familiar to me, even with the mask on. This may be the same protester. So these guys do this for a living. They are wearing masks so that they are impervious to the tear gas that's thrown. And let's move on to the next one here. This is one that I like very much, and I'm going to actually turn the sound up on because I want you to be able to hear. I want you to be able to hear this one, what's going on, because this is really great. You can't miss this. This guy is screaming like a 12-year-old girl at a Justin Bieber concert. Let's just.
Give us your hands! Give us your hands open!
Is it?
Put your hands on your back now!
He said, get on your back, and the guy's going, no! Those guys are shooting pepper balls, and they're shooting them at the street so that they sort of, waft the tear gas up into the face. That guy right there is a lawyer. Now let's go back to him. We'll see him in just a second. Okay, you see this guy right there on the left of the screen. He's got a green hat on. Why? And actually, he's yelling at the he's yelling at the guy that's being arrested. What's your name and date of birth? What's your name and date of birth? This is a group of volunteers who, some of them are lawyers, some of them are law students, some of them may just be regular people. They come to all these protests in Portland and Seattle and other places around the country, and they assist the protesters in getting out of jail. They take donations from all over the country, and they raise millions of dollars. And then when these people get arrested, one of these lawyers will take the guy's name and date of birth, and then they will go down and post bail for that guy. And that way he's not in jail for an hour. He never spends, very much time in jail at all. He gets booked, he gets bailed out, and he's immediately freed, and he can go back to the streets. This is a very well-funded, it looks like my microphone might be dying here. This is a very well-funded organization. They have millions of dollars, and they, some of these protesters I've reported before actually have figured out how they can end up making money off of getting arrested. They've worked out a crazy way to actually make money by they get bailed out, the charges get dropped, these guys get to keep the bail money that they get back, that kind of thing. So hang on just a second. I'm going to change microphones because this one is dying. Dead. D-E-D, dead. Okay. Let's see. Is that probably a little too quiet? Let's turn that up a little bit. Okay. So there we go. Now, put this one back away. The mayor of Portland used to be a guy named Ted Wheeler. And this guy was so left-wing that not only would he pull the police force of Portland back from these protests and not allow them to enforce the law there, but he would actually go down and participate in the protests. I was there and watched Ted Wheeler come down and participate in the protests around the federal building when Trump was president the first time. He would come down and he would get himself tear gassed on purpose. He would stand right up at the front and wait while they encroached on the federal building until the federal agents had to come out and push him back. And they'd throw tear gas, and then Ted Wheeler would get himself tear gassed, and that was his way of building street cred. Well, the new mayor of Portland is a guy named Keith Wilson. Now, Keith Wilson, compared to Ted Wheeler, is a conservative. But compared to anybody with 3 brain cells to rub together, he's a flaming liberal as well. He was elected in 2024, and he insists the city, he's a businessman, and he actually got elected on a platform of, I'm going to clean up the streets, I'm going to get rid of the homeless, we're going to, make things better because the crime rate is too high. Okay? So, he is insisting the city does not need troops. It's a beautiful, wonderful city in Portland. People are on social media putting out videos of, here's Portland today, and they show like just a regular street and it looks fine. And they say, we don't need any federal troops here. This is, ridiculous. Portland is a beautiful place. Well, look, I could go to Kabul or Beirut or Kyiv, I could go pretty much any city in the world, and I could show you, I could find a street in that city that looks like, wow, this is pretty nice. I might want to come here on vacation. But if you look at the actual statistics around Portland, things look a whole lot worse. Now, let's finish watching this one, and then I'll explain what I mean by that. So you see this lawyer here, he's trying to get the arrested guy's information so that they can go bail him out of jail. And he's still screaming bloody murder. Now look, all these cops are doing is the cops are saying, you can't come in the street. Look at that, they took this guy's mask off. He's looking pretty, like, what happened? What happened to me? He's got his elbow all banged up there, a little bit bloody. And these cops, they're just keeping people out of the street. Why? Because you should not be able to protest in the middle of the street because cars need to drive there. Protesting in the middle of the street stops those cars from going where they need to go, and that's called kidnapping. So if we talk about, if we take Mayor Keith Wilson at his word, and he says that, even though he won the election by saying Portland needs to be cleaned up, it's not livable, there's too many homeless, too much drug use, too much violence, and so I'm going to clean it up and get rid of all that. That's how he got elected. But now he's saying, no, Portland's a great place to live. It's wonderful. There's nothing wrong here. There's no need whatsoever for any law enforcement other than, just our regular police, which we don't actually allow to do much of anything anyway. He's calling it an ideological fight. But let's look at the numbers. This is not hard to find. Anybody that has access to the internet can go look this stuff up. Portland crime statistics. Here's what the data say. According to a list of U.S. cities that by crime rate, this is 2024 data, Portland has one of the highest total crime rates per 100,000 people among any U.S. city. Some reports say it's number 2. It's the number 2 most violent city in America. And it's hard to actually nail that down. It depends on how you measure it. And so some reports are not going to show it to be quite that high. But one of the reasons why it's hard to measure it is because city data reports that Portland's crime index, Area Vibes claims Portland ranks in the bottom 10% of cities that report violent crime, meaning Portland just doesn't report much of the violent crime that happens in their city. And so because of that, it's hard to actually get a handle on how violent Portland really is. If all of the violent crime that took place in Portland actually got reported, they might be number 1 in the whole country. As it is, city data reports Portland's crime index was 2.2 times the U.S. average, and that the city's crime rate was higher than 98% of U.S. cities. Portland's homicide count has trended upward. They had 94 homicides in 2023. And so while there's no single definitive list, if you look at it by any metric, Portland is among the most dangerous cities in America. You don't have to even look at that stuff, though. All you have to do is go to Portland and drive around or walk around downtown and notice how many businesses are boarded up. They might actually still be open, but they have their windows boarded up. Why is that? Well, 2 reasons. Number 1, these protests that happen almost nightly in Portland, the protesters like to break windows to show their displeasure with the federal government. So nothing says I'm upset with President Trump like smashing the window of a 7-Eleven, and that's what they do. The other reason is because these guys just love to spray paint everything within reach. So they put spray paint all over the walls, and it's hard to get off. So they've figured out that if we just attach plywood to the walls and let them spray paint that, then we can go out there and we can take if the streets ever do get cleaned up, we'll be able to go just take the plywood off, and it'll be easier than painting over all the graffiti. But I have to say that the last time I walked around downtown Portland, not only was I accosted several times by protesters threatening me, calling me a cop, trying to get people to rip my arms off, but it was really disgusting. I mean, it was like, it's hard to believe that this is the United States of America. Feces on the streets, on the sidewalks, people drugged out, laying around all over the place, sex acts committed in public. I mean, I could go on and on, but you get the idea. It's pretty disgusting. It's pretty nasty down there. And so I would not say that the mayor, Keith Wilson, has much of a leg to stand on, you know, when it comes to claiming that his city is just wonderful. Maybe it is where he lives, but he needs to go downtown once in a while and he might have a different idea. Portland has a long history of protests, whether, Occupy Wall Street, environmental protests, Black Lives Matter. It doesn't really matter. The protests in Portland never really stop. And many of these people, like I say, it's kind of a full-time job for them. They've figured out a way to actually make money by going out and getting themselves arrested protesting. And so it's, just goes on even during Democratic administrations. Wasn't near as bad during the Biden administration, but there were protests all the time down there even then. So it's become kind of a symbolic battlefield between Trump's law and order narrative and progressive politics writ large, whether that's local politics or Gavin Newsom, who I think I have a tweet that he put up here. Gavin Newsom, of course, California governor, probably running for president in the next presidential election. Why is there two of me there? Let's get rid of me. We'll get rid of that other one of me. I don't need two of me. This is sexy enough without two of me. So let's see here if I can find that tweet. Yeah, here it is. Gavin Newsom. Donald Trump is waging war on American cities. The courts have already said this is illegal, but he's pushing forward anyway. Well, what does he mean by that? President Trump sent 4,000 National Guard troops to Los Angeles to quell the riots and the attacks on the ICE facilities there. Gavin Newsom took him to court over that, and no surprise, a liberal left-wing Biden-appointed judge sided with Newsom and said, yes, this is illegal. However, an appeals court immediately struck that down, or at least put a stay on it and said, no, it's not illegal. You have to allow the president to do what he believes is necessary. If he says that there is a compelling need under the Insurrection Act to federalize National Guard troops and send them into American cities, you have to allow him to do that until it works its way, basically all the way to the Supreme Court. So right now, there are still National Guard troops in Los Angeles as we speak. And yet, Gavin Newsom, so you could make the case that Gavin Newsom lost that particular lawsuit. It's still working its way through the courts, but there are still troops there. But Gavin Newsom is pretending that the courts have already said this is illegal. This isn't about holding violent organizations accountable. No, actually it is. It is about holding violent organizations accountable. He said this is about inciting violence. Well, how do you incite violence when violence is already happening? So hopefully America will wake up to the fact that Gavin Newsom is a complete dolt and should not be allowed anywhere near a U.S. presidency. I don't think he could win, but we'll see. Now let's go back and talk about the history a little bit. Before that, a city councilwoman from Portland who came out and made some threats that I think might get her in trouble. Take a listen. Okay, they've already figured out that you can't do that. Gavin Newsom tried that one as well. Unfortunately, the state does not have the legal authority to tell federal agents what they can wear, but they're still trying to do so. Yeah, okay. Well, that's certainly not untrue. Anybody could put on a federal agent uniform and a mask and come kidnap you. But this is how liberals think. No sound on the video, they're saying. Okay, maybe it's just too low. All right, so, all right, I'll just tell you what she's saying since it's saying there's no sound on the video. So there are folks at a congressional level that are trying to get a mask ban passed, but they might not have the authority to do it because of something called the Supremacy Clause. And that's what I wanted to point out, was that under the Supremacy Clause, governors and state governments are not allowed to pass laws about, things as banal and as pedantic as the dress code for federal agents. There is a reason why the federal agents are wearing masks, and that's because Antifa and some politicians have been endeavoring to dox them and their families and put out their, here's the address of where he lives. Go turn on a bullhorn outside his house and play loud music all night, or scream at his kids when they're coming home from school, stuff like that. And what we need is to make harassing the family of a federal employee for political reasons a felony. It probably already is. I don't know. I mean, maybe we have some lawyers on that can school me on that, but it seems like it should be already. It should be a felony already. And so what that councilwoman from Portland was saying is that we're trying to pass a law that bans federal agents from wearing a mask. And yeah, not going to do that. But then she goes on to say, we encourage all the protesters to take pictures of all the federal agents and the equipment that they're using and everything like that, so that we can do research and track these people down. And that's exactly what she's doing. She's calling for the doxing of federal agents. That should be the kind of thing that gets that woman thrown in federal prison. You should not be able to dox federal agents, okay? So I don't know why that audio wasn't working. It shows that it's working on my end, but anyway, that's what she was saying. I think that, and now, obviously, she doesn't have any problem with protesters wearing masks. And I think you could make a better case for making it illegal for protesters to wear masks than you could making it illegal for federal agents to wear masks. But either way, the protesters are wearing masks and they're trying to prevent the law enforcement from doing so that they can dox the law enforcement and harass their families. That's exactly why they're doing that. Okay, so folks, looks like we've got over 4,000 people watching. Do me a favor and hit that like button and go to chuckholton.com, which is my locals page. Locals is like Patreon. And if you want to support the work that I do and you want to help keep us on the air, that's the best way to do it, is go over to locals and become a supporter, both for me and for you, because you get a lot of extra content that we put out, stuff that I can't show you on, on YouTube because it would get me demonetized. And it's better because then if I get demonetized on YouTube, which could happen in a heartbeat, you know how they are, then we can still pay our employees because we're actually gathering funds over there rather than just from YouTube ads. So, toss me a cup of coffee every month or whatever, and or a New York cup of coffee, let's say, because I paid $9 for a cup of coffee in New York a while back. And I appreciate all of the support we get, whether it's here on YouTube, the super chats, the super thanks that people give are very helpful. The memberships here on YouTube, the donations people give through our link tree, which hopefully one of the mods can put up. All of that they're all great ways to support the podcast and keep us bringing you content like this as time goes on. That I think the need is going to get greater and greater, and that's why the channel keeps growing. All right, so let's talk about the Posse Comitatus Act. It was put in force in 1878. And it prevents federal troops from engaging in domestic law enforcement without authorization. So you can't just have soldiers, infantrymen from someplace just going in and doing law enforcement duties. And it applies to all of the different services, Army, Navy, Air Force. The National Guard is exempt from the Posse Comitatus Act if they're under state control, but they're not exempt from Posse Comitatus if they are federalized. So get that. What that means is that when President Trump federalizes National Guardsmen and sends them to California or Oregon or whatever, he is essentially sending active duty U.S. military troops into those areas. So if you thought, you had heard about Posse Comitatus and you thought that it was patently illegal to send active duty U.S. troops into places like that, that's actually not correct. Under the Insurrection Act, which is 10 U.S. Code 251 to 253, the president can federalize state guards and even use active duty forces. They could use the 82nd Airborne if they wanted to, domestically in certain situations. They could do it at the request of a governor to suppress an insurrection. They could use it to enforce federal law when the federal law is being obstructed. And I think you could make a strong case for that taking place right now in places like California and Oregon, where the governors of the state are saying we are not going to allow federal law to be enforced in terms of immigration law. And so President Trump would be clearly able to send federalized troops into those areas. And he can also do it to protect civil rights when state authorities are unwilling or unable to do so. I think you can make a case there as well, because if Antifa is blocking traffic daily, if these protests are attacking civilians, keeping people awake at night, if they are causing business owners to have to close up shop or board up their stores, then those protests / riots are not, they're working in contravention of the civil rights of the people who live in those jurisdictions. And it's been, the Insurrection Act has been invoked at least 30 times throughout U.S. history. So all these politicians on social media are coming out saying this is patently illegal. You can't do this. Well, it's been done at least 30 times so far in our history. And I'm going to go through a few of those in just a minute. But I wanted to play for you a video of a resident of Portland who is very much in support of the president sending troops. Take a listen. So again, it's saying no sound. I'm not sure why that is happening here, because I show that the sound is working. Let me look at okay. Oh, crud. We have, I'll tell you what I'll do here. Let me just get rid of that. And sometimes reinstalling it helps. So give me just a second and I will reinstall this video. There he is. Maybe you can hear it now.
I am so happy that Trump is sending the National Guard in here. I live in this building. We both live in this building.
Well, that might be a little harsh, but okay. So what? Somebody's saying the sound stopped. It was okay, and then it stopped. Well, because I stopped the video. Okay, so some people are saying they still can't hear it. It cuts in and out. I don't know what caused that, but nevertheless, I just wanted to, well, some people said they did. We heard it for a few seconds and then it cut out. Okay, all right. What he's saying is I'm very excited for the president to come to send federal troops into Portland. You could barely hear the guy because behind him, people were screaming through loudspeakers and beating on drums and things like that. They do that all hours of the day and night. They do that throughout the day and night in those areas around the ice. And so all the people that live around there, they've had to like go elsewhere to get any sleep. And there are videos, not recent ones that I've seen, but there are videos of some of the people in those apartment buildings coming outside and just going crazy on the protesters. And the protesters just mock them and make fun of them. So you can imagine people are pretty tired of Antifa in Portland. And Antifa just feels like they've got the right to keep you up all night, even if you have nothing to do with it. You might have even supported Antifa. But if you live anywhere near that ICE facility, you probably don't support them anymore because you haven't been able to sleep for the last 6 months. So the bottom line is this guy was saying, I want President Trump to use whatever force is necessary to annihilate these people. That's what he said. And annihilate might be a little harsh, but yeah. So the National Guard federalization statutes, which is again part of 10 U.S. code, allow the president to call up Guard units to federal service under those limited circumstances. Now, critics argue Trump hasn't met the Insurrection Act threshold. There's no active insurrection or rebellion in Portland. Well, I don't know. What do you call that? Do you just call that a protest? If they're actively trying to stop the federal government from enforcing the law, if they are actively presenting a lethal threat to law enforcement as they try to enforce the law, as they stop traffic and keep people from being able to go about their business, and all to, express their anger at the U.S. government. What do you call that? It looks a lot like an insurrection to me. Now, that federal property's been attacked, the law's been obstructed, and it's totally justified as far as I'm concerned. Courts historically defer heavily to presidents in decisions like this. Going all the way back to 1827, there was a court case called Martin versus Mott, where the court said that you've got to give the president the benefit of the doubt in cases like this, okay? Now, let's talk about historical use of U.S. troops in U.S. cities. Go back to 1957. President Eisenhower federalized the Arkansas National Guard and sent the 101st Airborne in to enforce desegregation. I wonder if these leftists would have a problem with that. Go to Detroit in 1967. President Johnson sent federal troops and National Guardsmen to end the riots that had killed 43 people. 1970, Kent State. Ohio National Guard under state control shot and killed 4 students protesting in the Vietnam. They were protesting the war in Vietnam. So there's a chilling example of how deadly things can get. The Rodney King riots in 1992. President Bush Sr. federalized the California National Guard and sent in the Marines. 63 people died in the unrest there. Back in 2020, under Trump's first term, federal agents, not the National Guard, but federal ATF, DEA, guys like that, clashed with protesters. And like I say, I was there for that. And there was a lot of controversy about those guys riding around in unmarked vans. But if they don't ride around in unmarked vans, their vans get firebombed, literally, get attacked. And so they have to go around in unmarked vehicles. Now, and there's no law against that. There's no law that says that law enforcement cannot go undercover, that they have to always be in marked vehicles wearing uniforms. There's no law about that. So the main claims that President Trump is violating the Constitution are stupid. They're just crazy. Portland is absolutely in chaos. Just because you can find a street in Portland where Antifa happens not to be at any given moment doesn't mean that it's not true, that there's an insurrection going on in Portland and Chicago and many other places around the country. The left politicians from the Squad and people like that are saying that this is an authoritarian rehearsal for broader crackdowns that are going to take place across America. Well, they say that like it's a bad thing. I kind of hope that there's broader crackdowns across America on Antifa, on these protests or riots that take place that are shutting down American cities. It absolutely needs to happen. Now, the irony is, many of these same voices were cheering for Joe Biden's Department of Justice when he was using a sledgehammer to prosecute Proud Boys and Oath Keepers. The head of the Proud Boys got 22 years in jail for the actions of other Proud Boys, not himself, because he didn't go in the Capitol on October 6th, but he got 22 years in prison. So what happens is, and I believe the guy that was in charge of Oath Keepers also got multiple years in prison. Some other leaders in the Proud Boys got 10 to 17 years, I think, in prison. Now, many, if not most of those guys were eventually pardoned by President Trump, thank God. But let's compare the treatment of various extremist groups under Joe Biden as opposed to under President Trump. Now, Oath Keepers leader, his name is Stuart Rhodes, he was sentenced to 18 years for seditious conspiracy. The Proud Boys leader, Enrique Tarrio, also he got 22 years for the same reason, despite not being physically present in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. Dozens of others got 10 to 18 years. However, if you look back at the unrest during President Trump's administration, under President Trump and then President Biden, Black Lives Matter, Antifa riots, things like that, there were a lot of arrests made, about 10,000, but almost all of those saw their charges dropped and basically faced no consequences for their actions. That's because there are a lot of left-wing district attorneys who refuse to prosecute. There are a lot of states attorneys that refuse to prosecute, and so there were a few arsonists, individuals that got sentences, but no sweeping federal conspiracy cases took place. And that's because Biden's DOJ treated right-wing groups as organized conspiracies, but then treated left-wing groups as isolated criminal acts salted throughout the mostly peaceful protests. But President Trump is now flipping the script on them. And critics are losing their mind. They're setting their hair on fire because President Trump is threatening to charge Antifa rioters with seditious conspiracy. Now, so far, we've not seen that come to fruition, and there's going to be a lot of legal challenges to it, I'm sure. As a matter of fact, that woman that was arrested in the first video I showed today was released after about an hour and came out dancing and saying, I win, I didn't get any, she didn't even get a ticket. So why is this important? Well, let's talk about that for a minute. It's important because when violent people are allowed to commit violence in the name of the First Amendment, this is our valid right to protest, to burn cars and, destroy property and attack federal agents and all that kind of stuff. When that case is made by leftists across America, what that does is it opens the door to more and more violence. It says there is no actual deterrent for violence across America. There's no punishment if you engage in violence as long as it's political. So we see things like the Charlie Kirk assassination. Just within the last 36 to 48 hours, we saw the Michigan church violence. It wasn't just a shooting, it was arson. 4 people killed and 8 wounded there. And people say, but that guy was MAGA. Well, okay, maybe he was. And we heartily denounce that kind of violence. Any MAGA person that wouldn't denounce that kind of violence is evil. Okay, so that's the difference, is that you're very rarely going to hear left-wing politicians denounce violence, even if it's fatal. Southport, North Carolina, on the waterfront, there was a bar that got shot up, 3 people killed and 5 people wounded by another U.S. military veteran. Eagle Pass, Texas, at a casino, there were 2 people killed and 7 people, I think, injured in a mass shooting that happened down there. There were other reports of shootings in Alexandria, Virginia, Raleigh, North Carolina, New Orleans. They're going around, but haven't been able to confirm all the details of those. If you count a mass shooting as 3 or more people being shot, there have been over 500 mass shootings so far in 2025, according to the Gun Violence Archive. Now, that's a left-wing archive, and they're going to skew the numbers to try to make it look worse than it is. Bottom line is, things are dangerous in America, and we need to do what we can about it. So let's talk about what we can expect going forward. I think we're going to see more arrests and raids as the Trump administration kind of leans into the domestic terror framing of Antifa. Hopefully he will federalize a lot more troops and actually, make a difference, actually lock down. Because what I'm seeing, I want to show you this. This came from Fox News, and I can show you this. Well, hopefully you can hear it. So I'm going to play this Fox News clip, and we'll see if you cannot hear it, just hit, as soon as I see no sound, I'll just cut away from it. Let's see here. Okay. All right. So they're saying no sound on that. But what you saw there was federal agents arresting one guy and walking him off to a car. And shortly after that, the federal agents all had to jump on the outside of a truck and take off because they were backing out. They were leaving because they were overwhelmed. That doesn't look like effective policing of Antifa. They need to outnumber Antifa just a couple of times. Just a couple of times. They need to put so many troops on the ground, and they need to corral Antifa, arrest every single one of those suckers, and throw the book at them in federal court. Make some of those people go to prison for at least the next 3 years. And if I guarantee you, if there's a Democratic president next time, he will immediately pardon all those people. No, I don't think it has to do with the AirPods, but the bottom line is, they need to ramp it up. So I'm hoping to see more arrests and raids as the administration leans into this framing. We're going to see more court battles and more lawfare over the federalization of troops and the designation of Antifa as a terror group. Judges are going to have to interpret the laws because, as I said, we don't have a domestic terror group designation. Now, we could, and this is basically just going to be a narrative war for the time being. Now, let's talk about some historical precedents here. Federal troops were used in the 1870s against the KKK. And they actually sent troops in to fight the KKK and to break up the KKK. They eventually came back as a more political organization, and they federalized troops again against them, but they didn't actually have warfare, open warfare against them. They the Weathermen in the 1970s bombings led to FBI infiltrating that group. And there were some prosecutions, but they collapsed because they called it illegal surveillance. So that's one thing they have to be careful of. Back in the 1920s, the United States Army used aircraft and troops to suppress armed miners who were fighting against private military contractor groups that were brought in by the mine companies, because in that case, the miners were actually in the right, but they were getting nowhere with the federal government, and so they took matters into their own hands, and the president had to send in the U.S. Army. And we're talking about, that was the largest domestic armed uprising since the Civil War. That happened back in the 1920s. So we have the ability to use force, we have the ability to use intelligence gathering, and then to try to use prosecutions to cause this to be a deterrent against this. But we have to be careful. And I want to end with this, because if we're not careful and we are cheering President Trump on, which is tempting to do here, because I love to see Antifa getting taken to task. But if we're not careful, we could see overreach in terms of federal authority that will, number one, get Antifa let off because it'll get thrown out of court. But more importantly, could set a precedent for a more violent crackdown on the right the next time we have a left-wing government in charge. And that day is coming. I know many people would like to hope that the leftists will never get the presidency again, but that's probably a mad wish. And so everything that's being done by this president will likely be tried by the next one, and it will be tried against people like you and me, most likely. So we need to encourage our lawmakers to charge real crimes and prosecute conspiracies where they exist. Don't allow vandalism and assaults. Thank you for that $10. But courts have to clarify how far presidential authority goes in dealing with stuff like this. And some of this is not exactly uncharted territory, but it needs to be clarified in the courts. And so we'll just leave it at that. Now, I want to go over and answer some questions. We just hit an hour, so I'm sorry about that. I'm trying to not go for an hour and a half, but it is what it is. And I don't want to go without answering your questions. So I got to pull those up over here. Let's see here. I need to get to my question sheet. Brian Sullivan says, is the active denial system in operation? That is a technology whereby they can point, I think it's microwaves at an area, and anybody that's in that area is going to feel like their skin is on fire. It's non-lethal. It doesn't cause any permanent damage, but it has not been used very much in the United States, if at all. I think it should be. But with an area denial system like that, the problem you run into is that it's not as surgical as like a paintball. So if there's a guy, a federal agent there, and he's got a paintball gun with pepper spray in it, and there's a guy pointing a green laser in his eyes, something that would be a crime, he can light that guy up, just that guy, maybe just the people around him, rather than a whole area. And those things are so effective, the active denial system, they're so painful that it's basically called cruel and unusual punishment. And so I doubt we'll see that happening in this, anytime soon. Debbie said, maybe I misunderstand me. Why are some of the governors seemingly against law and order and peace for their people? They're just against President Trump. So anything President Trump does, if President Trump says, I love puppies, they're going to say puppies are terrible. They can't, we should get rid of all the puppies. They're just against everything. Kenny Heyer says, why are they wearing masks? That would make most people fight back. I think, are you talking about the cops? Cops are wearing masks because they're getting doxxed and because it's dangerous for them not to wear masks. The protesters are wearing masks so that they can't be recognized on camera, and they're wearing masks to be able to avoid being, affected by tear gas when it gets shot at them. And that ought to be illegal. Wearing those kinds of masks in a protest should, I think you could pretty clearly pass a federal law that says if you are at a peaceful protest, you cannot wear a mask, anything more than just a medical grade mask. You can't wear like the painter's masks or the ones that are in respirators, because that would make you impervious to tear gas, and we have to be able to use those kinds of non-lethal measures to break up an unauthorized assembly or a illegal assembly. Seven Species says, do citizens have guns in Portland? No. Criminals always have guns. No, the citizens it's very, very difficult to get a gun in Oregon. Lord Peanut says, can someone tell me if Chuck is saying that sending troops is good or bad? I think it's good. Lisa Allison says, why do the charges get dropped? Because the attorneys, the state's attorneys and district attorneys that have to prosecute these crimes very often are in the pocket of the left. They're funded by George Soros. George Soros has put millions of dollars into getting left-wing DAs elected across the country. And so they drop the charges because they can. And that's, they side with the left. And so they think, well, there's nothing really wrong here. Now, I don't think that is the case if they're going to be brought up on federal charges. And so hopefully bringing people up on federal charges and putting some people in prison that way will be more effective. Patrick Wickersheim says, do you think the UK is next with the announcement of mandatory digital ID? That's a whole different podcast. We should do a whole podcast on that, Patrick. Definitely against those, but mandatory digital IDs are coming for everybody in the United States as well. 1 in 407T says, isn't anybody talking about the incident that happened in Michigan yesterday? Well, I mentioned it. The guy was veteran. He was a former Marine, I believe. He'd been to combat. He was an avid hunter. by some accounts, he was a diehard MAGA voter. Other accounts show that he had donated money to Act Blue, which means he probably was not a MAGA voter. But those are not. Those have not been corroborated yet. So take that with a grain of salt. Peta and Carla ask, why can't these protesters be charged with federal charges and avoid from getting off scot-free? Well, we just talked about that. Lori says, can Antifa now be arrested for their shenanigans? Apparently, yes. It's just a question of how many Antifa can be arrested for their shenanigans, because they still don't have enough agents or troops up there to arrest everybody. Who gave these people the right to do this? Nobody. Kay Shepard says, how is it criminals could get out of jail but patriotic J6ers could not? Well, we covered that. Do you have a Rumble channel? Yep, sure do. Go look me up. Go look up the Hot Zone on Rumble, and we put all of these lives over on Rumble as well. Christian Kiefer says, why do you think so many people are against ICE? Because they're leftists and they've been told to. Most of them could not detail for you, at least the ones I've talked to. They don't do a very good job detailing for you why we shouldn't enforce federal law. And if you're against the enforcement of federal law, then you should work to get the law changed, not work to neuter our law enforcement. Law enforcement is there to enforce the law, and they should enforce the law. And if you don't like it, then get the law changed. Somebody says, what would happen if law enforcement walked away from these cities and let the chips fall where they may? Federal buildings would get burned to the ground. Police stations would get burned to the ground. ICE facilities would get burned to the ground. They would get attacked everywhere. Lori asks, was I in Seattle during the 2020 CHOP protest? Yes, I was. And Betsy asks, what percentage of citizens are Antifa? Very small. If you're talking about of Americans are Antifa, very, very small numbers. Very small numbers. Antifa probably is maybe 10,000 people total across the country. It's hard to say because Antifa is an ad hoc organization. There's no official way to join Antifa. You just put on a bunch of black clothes and go out and LARPing against the police officers, and you can call yourself Antifa. So it's more of a worldview than it is an organization. Now, there is some organization to it. These protests don't just happen spontaneously. They do get planned and executed by certain people, and those are the people that the federal government is going after. What can we do? Well, you can arm up, protect yourself, that's for sure. Shauna D says, who's really behind Antifa? We've talked about that before. Left-wing groups donate to political action committees and other NGOs that then kind of launder that money through several different steps before it gets to Antifa. But Antifa is definitely funded that way. And there is some evidence out there that China and Qatar have both funded organizations that ended up funding Antifa. So we've done podcasts on that before. You can go back and watch those. Lone Wolf says, how does it make you feel we are being called fascist for pointing out the left is violent? Don't care what the left thinks. We shouldn't care. You shouldn't care. If they can call us whatever they want. Those people are, they're beyond the pale. They're ridiculous, and you should just ignore them. Stutz says, should the Supreme Court redefine what a protest and protester is? I think we do need to clarify and codify where the line is between riot and protest. And that's for the courts to decide. So let's hope that happens sooner rather than later. Elle says, Chuck, have we discussed the protest in Britain on September 13th on taking Britain back? No, I don't think so. I don't think we've done that. And there is one more thing I want to show you before we go that is just pretty awesome. And if I know I put it here somewhere. So yeah, I've got it. And maybe the sound is not working, but that's okay. I'll show this to you anyway, because this is pretty sweet. Here we go. Where'd it go? You might say, what is this? Is this another protest? Nope. This is in downtown Portland last night. People were getting baptized. They were getting saved, becoming Christians, and being baptized right there in Pioneer Square, which is not far from where Antifa last year tore down a statue of Abraham Lincoln. And there have been a lot of protests and things down there. And so here's a girl who is, there's no sound to this. Don't worry, no sound. But she's being baptized here. And so it's not all bad news, folks. There are some really wonderful things happening as I think more and more people, even in the blue-haired crowd, are starting to understand that there's no future in that. They're starting to understand that they don't want to live that lifestyle anymore, and they don't want to be associated with something that is increasingly violent and destructive, and they're turning to Christ. So that's what our prayer needs to be, that more people would just be so disgusted that the Holy Spirit would come and convict people who are even taking part in these protests, and that they would get so disgusted with what they see down there that they would turn to Christ. So we'll end it there, but that's a pretty good way to end it if you ask me. All right. God bless you. Thank you very much for watching the Hot Zone today. Make sure that you subscribe to the podcast and go over to chuckholton.com and you can sign up as a supporter there and get lots of extra stuff. We're going to be putting out merch. We've got a lot more coming. I got another book coming out. So stay tuned for all of that. Also, look in the description of this live and you can get the link to our sponsor. You can get a link to our trip to Armenia that's coming up next June if you want to join us and come to, hang out with me and my wife as we tour one of the most beautiful countries on planet Earth next June. And then you can also get the link to my new YouTube channel, which is it's much less chaos and mayhem. And it's just me hiking and touring and a lot of the beautiful things that I get to see and don't get to bring you in my news reporting. So there's that. All right.